with my colleague Alicia Rhodes the First Year Initiative in the Career Center. And this initiative is created to help students engage early and often with the Career Center to think about their professional development, how they want to engage at Duke, and really take Duke for kind of all it's worth. And I'm really excited that you're here today, that we can talk with you about the First Year Initiative and some of our competencies that we have developed. So I'll turn it over to Bill now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Wright-Swaddell. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and the Fannie Mitchell Executive Director of the Career Center. I suspect I've met some of you over the course of years. I'm now into my 11th year at Duke. But I've been in the business of career services. Duke is my 7th academic institution, so I've been doing this for a while. And it's really exciting to be with you and to talk about your students and their progress and how they're going to move through the university. We think about the concept of design your Duke as each one of the students finding Duke to be a place where they will thrive. So we're going to go quickly through our presentation. We'd like to get to the questions, and I will move as quickly as I can, and you'll all have an opportunity to see the slides, but also they will be posted later, so you have an opportunity, because some of them are going to, the details of them will be a little hard to see. And if that's the case, you'll be able to inspect them and enlarge them later on your screen. So let's get started and see what we need to do. And I'm really glad you're with us today. So the goals for the day. We want to talk about the Duke value proposition. What is it that is extraordinary about Duke? The major tells it all, or does it? We get lots of conversation and questions about major and how important that is. We want to talk with you about identify what is changing that impacts the Duke experience. And we want to provide a view of the Career Center and how the Career Center team works, and develop some keys to career development. What are the things that we know work for the women and men who are students here at Duke? And finally, we want to talk about the competencies model that we have developed. We'll talk a little bit about a national competencies model, but we've developed our own competencies model in the Career Center that we are training your students to use. So let's get started with the values proposition. So the first thing is to understand that Duke has the great advantage of being what I would describe as an extraordinary traditional liberal arts institution. It is an institution that has faculty members who love their disciplines, are fully engaged in their disciplines, and the students are engaged in the academic process. But Duke is extraordinary among the great liberal arts institutions in the country because of the degree to which it has made itself also a pre-professional environment, and a recognition that as much as we love the notion of study for study's sake and learning for learning's sake, the reality is that we know that you as parents and family members, but the students themselves are really extraordinarily interested in turning that education into value across their lifetime and their professions. So the second thing I would say is that Duke is about as interdisciplinary, intercultural, and global an environment as you can imagine. The students have not a major often, but two. They not only have majors, but minors, and they also have the opportunity to engage in certificate programs. So they can be as interdisciplinary themselves as possible, but the curriculum itself is now also interdisciplinary. Duke is also an extraordinarily culturally diverse environment, whether the students are here and studying here, or are studying in exchange programs or global education programs, or through their development of internships and other learning experiences, including the research that they do, perhaps as a freshman and certainly as a senior in their senior thesis. I think the other thing is that Duke is a competency-based environment. We recognize very early that the students are developing competencies as scholars, they are developing competencies as researchers, but they are also developing competencies that fit outside the academy as well. And that is a conscious thing, whether you're talking about students who are part of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or they're part of the Center for Global Health, or any of the other interdisciplinary centers in the university. There is an engagement beyond the academy, and we recognize and really help students to develop those competencies as they go. The thing we love about your students, frankly, is they are about as diversely skilled and interested as any group of students you can imagine in the country. Our students, so one of the images that I create with parents and students often is the notion that if you have a student here who's studying literature, for example, she may be using algorithms to develop an understanding of that. Or if we're talking about a student who is an engineering student, it's not unusual to meet them because they're engaged in a conversation about the haiku that they're writing. So we have students that are both skilled and interested at an extraordinarily high level across the platforms that you would imagine that employers and faculty members might find interesting, but certainly from a Career Center perspective, it creates students who are extraordinarily interesting beyond graduation. So the second thing I would focus on is this notion, excuse me, of major. And we often hear from parents and students, should I major in a particular field? I, for example, was a history major as an undergraduate. And the reality is the major is a place that a student uses to develop how extraordinary they are. And it should be an area that they love being in conversation with their faculty. The courses should be the kinds of things that they enjoy studying, but it doesn't necessarily project to what they're going to do after graduation. I'm going to show you several charts, and what you have before you are 4 charts that actually all look pretty remarkably similar. And what you see on the charts, and this is one of the charts that I was saying it's going to be hard to read the details, but I wanted to put the 4 on the single slide to show you that our undergraduates from the humanities, our students in the natural sciences, our students in the social sciences, and our students in engineering go in a broad array of directions at graduation. Their career paths not only are diverse while they are here, but they launch into a range of different fields. And so if we take that representation, pictorial representation, and we actually show the data, what you can see is that there are students from the humanities going into engineering at graduation, or arts and entertainment, or business, or science, medicine, and technology. And if you look at engineers, you see a very similar pattern. The percentages are different, but the patterns are the same. If you look at social sciences or natural sciences, you see the range of expression that our students find for the areas that are their major, if you will. And if you add to that the fact that they have a second major often, and certificate programs and co-curricular engagements, it's not unusual at all for a student who may be in, I work with a student now who's an engineering student from mechanical engineering who is developing as a world-class photographer. And one of the things he and I have talked about is how significant the relationship is between his work as an engineer and his work as an artist. And photography is a particular expression of that. And so I think that it's really, as I talk to parents, I usually say to them, the major is a place that the student demonstrates the real strength of their academic prowess. And so it's really important that individual students are studying things where they will do well and they will also enjoy themselves, because frankly, academics are rigorous at a place like Duke, and they need to be fully engaged in order to really, really thrive departmentally. And I think that's really important, as much for the performance that it demonstrates in their ability to learn and continue to develop, but they are also going to be networking among these faculty members and alumni and others in some of the competencies that we teach later on. So I think the major is critical, mostly because it's a place where students will thrive. It is less predictive about what students are going to do later. So let's move on. What changes are happening in our students that are really critical as we think about their development through the Career Center? And the first is Duke is increasing its diversity of pre-Duke experience and identities in education all the time. And so, the students, when they arrive at Duke, some of them have come from public high schools in major urban centers. Others have studied abroad and gone to independent schools. And some of our students have been homeschooled in a state, for example, where I went to school in Maine or Idaho, or in a city environment. And so the reality is it's really critical that our students, when they arrive, we want to reach them early in their career so that we can, as much as anything, appreciate the diversity of their experience, but also help them to really identify where it is within the university that they need to strengthen their background in order to level the playing field, if you will, with the other students who are here. The students, as I've said, are diversely interested and able and interdisciplinary, but frankly, I'm surprised every year by the degree to which that gets more and more true. Students want to know, students are in a hurry, not unlike their parents, and sometimes I think they get it from you. But realistically, students want to know the outcome of their education before it begins, okay? And so they're very, very tactical in that sense. And we want to be able to respond to that, but we don't want to respond to that in the junior or senior year, but we want them aware of how the decisions they are making are impacting on their not only education, but on their long-term prognosis from the get-go. And it's really critical that we do that, which is why we spend as much time with first years as we do. They have engaged parents. Media, there is more media today talking about the value or the lack of value in a college education than you can imagine. And frankly, the debates run rampant on campus and everywhere else. But you and your students are reading the value proposition, and frankly, from my perspective, there is no argument. The fact of the matter is, students will develop on their own, irrespective of what they choose to do, but there is not a better environment in the world to develop intentionality and intentionally than being in a university setting. And certainly, as you know, we're being asked all the time by governments, both state and federal, for more and more information about first destination and what happens at graduation. And frankly, often yesterday doesn't do a very good job of predicting tomorrow, but because the way the world changes. But it is certainly, that engagement is there, and our students hear about it and read about it constantly. What's happening in the market that's changing that we're trying to respond to and help your students respond to? Certainly two things. The markets that our students are interested in are both more global and more local. And what I mean by that is, for example, when I arrived at Duke 10 years ago, North Carolina was barely one of the destination points for Duke students. I think it was about the 12th most popular destination for Duke students back 10 or 11 years ago. Today, it's the #1 destination at graduation. Now, most people think it's New York or Washington or San Francisco, and certainly those are all in the top environments where our students go at graduation. But frankly, the numbers don't predict what your individual student will do. She will go or he will go based in part on the market they are interested in and where that market is thriving. And that may be Durham at graduation, or it may be Dundee, Scotland. And we need to prepare them for both of those markets. The diversification of employers is really happening quickly. And what I mean by diversification of employers is if we go back a number of years ago, it was not unusual for the average number of students hired by any organization to be in double digits, 10, 15, 20, 30 students going to a particular organization. Today, the average in the country, the average number of students that any one employer offers jobs to at a college campus is about 1.5. At Duke, it's right in the 2.5 students per employer. We obviously have some employers that hire 10, 15, 20, but that's not a major part of our market. It's much more, we do a great job of teaching students how to look, where to look, when to look, and how to develop the experience while they're here. And so as the diversification of employers happens, including startups and entrepreneurial shops, either where students go to work or they begin the entrepreneurial environment themselves, that number is going up constantly. Increased demand for early experiential opportunities. We used to think of students getting a great experiential opportunity in the junior year. Today, your students arrive on campus and begin to ask the Career Center about how they get research experiences. What should they do with their summer? Should they be going to? Mom and Dad want me to come home for this last summer, and I really think I should be in New York. Or that conversation is happening with you and about you as family and parents. And for the students, it's never too early to start, but frankly, if you and they need to be together at home for the first summer, that can work as well. But certainly for us, the conversation with the employers and with the students tells us that there's a demand for experiential education as early as the students can get it. And so, as I've said, not only do you want it, do the students want it, but employers want access to our students. It was not long ago that many employers would say, freshmen, they don't know very much. Let's wait until they've been in their major for a while. That's not true now. They really want to get to know your sons and daughters, and they want them to have experiences with them as early as possible. So that kind of access is available. And it's something that the students know about. The big change in the market is really not only automation, but artificial intelligence, and it is impacting markets all the time, as you know, and we know. In many ways, that's a really good thing, and in other ways, that's a challenge. And what it really portends more than anything else is the reality that change is happening very, very quickly. Your students will be here on average 4 years. And so what's happening in the work world today and what will be happening in the work world if your son or daughter is a first-year student 4 years from now are going to be really different. And we want students, and we try to stay on top of the kind of changes that are going on in that marketplace all the time. And so communicating that with and to your students and thinking that through both in our counseling sessions, but also in our presentations is a change that we talk about regularly. So what's happening in the Career Center to respond to this dynamic market, the changes that we're undertaking. And one of my snippy staff members decided to put flipped process. You notice when it came up, it flipped. I won't tell you that that was Christina, but it was. But what we've done is, if you think about a flipped classroom, what we think of as a flipped process in the Career Center is really targeting our relationship, particularly to first and second year students, because we want them to take the greatest advantage of Duke that they possibly can throughout their experience. So our process and the charge that my staff has is to be engaged with every first year student from the first year. That doesn't mean we don't work with seniors or juniors or upper class students. What it means is we want the conversation with them to be a developed conversation. They know people in the Career Center. They're working with us. They know how we operate. We know something about them. So realistically, the changes that they undertake, and intentionally or unintentionally while they're at university, is something that we're aware of, they're aware of, and those processes are being managed. Second, we're engaging with more employers in new ways. And so as often as we can, we're bringing employers to campus, whether that's as speakers, as experts in residence. They come in the departments, they come to the Career Center, they engage with students in their co-curricular clubs and organizations, but we also engage with them electronically. And so the New England Aquarium was on campus this morning making a presentation, and frankly, they were still in Boston, and our students were here, and the conversation was going on in an electronic fashion. And so that kind of engagement is happening in as many ways as we can think of with alumni and with others. Sharing the professional development space across campus and the Duke network. What I mean by that is really simple. The Career Center does not own professional development or career development. It's happening in the departments. It's happening in the institutes. It's happening in co-curricular clubs and organizations for art, fraternities and sororities, and in the living environments. And so professional development is ongoing and happening. The fourth point is we are trying to be very intentional and help your students to be intentional. We don't want them making decisions that they didn't anticipate. And so that intentionality of relationship with freshmen and upperclassmen is something we want to have, but we want them to engage as well. We're intentionally engaged. We're intentionally collaborative. We are intentionally intrusive with the students and with the employers. We are intentionally local, national, and international, because we know your students are going to be in all of those markets as we go. So I'm moving very quickly so we can get to your questions, but 6 keys to career development. Be intentional. And I use a buffet. If any of you have ever been with a 12-year-old boy at a buffet, it can be an extraordinarily scary experience. I know when I was 12 at a buffet, I picked up a plate. I went to the beginning of the buffet and I started loading my plate. And by the time I got to the table, I usually had 3 plates that didn't look much like a meal. They looked much like a pile of food. Casseroles are wonderful things when they're intentional. A pile of food, you can't taste anything. We want students making good decisions at the buffet that is the Duke educational environment. And so we want them to be very, very intentional. We don't think about your son or daughter having a mentor. We talk with them about building and connecting with a board of directors, a team of people. You may be one of those members of their board. And certainly we want parents to be involved in their advising, but we don't want you to be the chairman of the board. We want you to be a member of the board. There's only one chairman of the board of directors, and it is your son or daughter. And so we know, for example, a Rhodes candidate or a Marshall candidate for a fellowship at graduation needs 8 to 12 letters of recommendation. You don't develop those kinds of relationships in the senior year. You develop those across your time at Duke. And so we teach students to connect from the very beginning. We want students to reflect. Sometimes our students get really, really busy and they think that they can move from experience to experience to experience with no consequence. And frankly, without reflection and understanding what you learned, how you learned it, what you missed, why you missed it, is really very purposeful, and it allows you then to include what you have learned in the next set of decisions. And so connect and reflect are things that you will see come up often in the Career Center. Learning to tell your story at an interview, on paper, in a resume, in a cover letter, in a meeting with an alum, in a meeting with a friend of your parents, the opportunity to tell people about your story and what you're doing and why you're doing it needs to become intentional. We hate the notion of a resume being written for the first time by a senior and they have no idea how to do it. And so we are working very hard to make sure that students are learning that communication strategy throughout. We want students to acquire market research skills. You know, many of you understand that in the first year, as many as 30% of our freshmen think they're pre-meds, and they start out with on that journey. And realistically, many of them will not end up applying to medical school, and half of the students who end up applying to medical school didn't begin as pre-meds. And so realistically, our students need to know not only how to go about pursuing the direction that they're moving in, but they need to learn how to do the kind of research necessary to identify alternative fields as their areas of interest mature, develop, and change. And finally, we need them to learn how to fail forward and adapt. They have been in the top 10% about everything they tried all through high school, and they suddenly come to Duke, and you may understand this, but often the freshmen don't. About half of them will be in the bottom half of the class, and there isn't a whole lot we can do about that. That doesn't mean they're doing badly. It just means that, if you divide the class in the top half and the bottom half of them are going to be there. If we move the bottom half to the top half, another half falls out and ends up in the bottom half. They need to learn and understand that they are not going to be the best at everything. They need to learn how to adapt when things don't work or their interests and abilities change. And so this notion of failing forward is something we work on with our students on a really regular basis. So I mentioned that we would talk about two sets of competencies. NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, it's a group of career centers and recruiters from around the country that we participate in, have created a set of career readiness competencies that are standard across the country. I'm going to go through them very, very quickly. It's pretty hard to go to Duke and not develop these competencies. So if your student doesn't develop one of them, it's probably because she or he didn't want it. And frankly, we've probably been arguing with them about that all the way through. But the critical thinking and problem solving, oral and written communications, teamwork and collaboration, many of these are things your sons and daughters already do well. A competency in digital technology, that would be data as well as technology and data analytics. Leadership, professionalism, and the development of a strong work ethic. If anybody does not have a strong work ethic at Duke, I'd be really shocked at that. Global and intercultural fluency. And then this last one called career management, which is a set of skills that we've now looked at in the Career Center and said, what does that actually mean? And what should the competencies be that we are teaching your sons and daughters so they can thrive at Duke and so they can thrive in their first job, in their graduate training, which 70% of them will do within the first 4 years, or across their career lifetime. And so we built this model. We call it the Duke Student Competencies for Postgraduate Success. You'll notice in the center is intentional professional development. And that word intentional comes up over and over again with the Career Center. If you go to the outside edges, the concept of reflection on experience and the concept of connection and building advisors and a network of people who you know and who know you is really a critical competence. And then we've developed 5 competencies areas in the middle. Um, I can't see them all actually because my screen is a little funky, but let me get all of them up so I can go through them all with you. Self-awareness, the ability to research, which we talked about, the ability to adapt, which we've already talked about, the ability to communicate and tell your story, and then the implementation skills. Can you write resumes? Can you write cover letters? Can you take an interview, a one-on-one in front of an individual? Can you do group interviews? Can you do interviews online or through the computer? All of those kinds of implementation skills are things that we are engaged in and working at. And we create it as a model, and it's circular in nature because realistically, one of the things we know is that students will come in and out of this model at different stages and at different points. Some of your students have great self-awareness skills. They know exactly what it is that's going to make them a great engineer, but they don't know necessarily what it is that's going to make them a great artist. And if that's the direction they pursue, they may need to recalibrate and rethink. And we want to be a part of that process with them. So the competency model that we talked about really has foundational competencies of reflection. And we break reflection down into 3 components: preflection, inflection, and reflection. What do you anticipate before you go into an experience? What do you hope to gain by that experience is what we call preflection. It's the building of a plan for your internship or your course or your engagement with a co-curricular activity. Then inflection is what's actually happening when you're in the middle of it. There's nothing sadder to me than a student who comes to us after a summer and says, I had a lousy internship. And when you say, when did you know it was lousy? They said the 3rd day. What did you do about it? What could I do? I just did the best I could with it. Well, no, that's not true. There's always action you can take to gain more, to renegotiate. And we hope students do that in the process. Then what did I learn? The actual reflection, what happened? How did I influence it? In what ways could I have adjusted it if I didn't? And then how do I use these learnings to inform the next set of experiences? And so we want students to have that ability. The connection piece, Duke has lunch programs where students can take a faculty member to lunch. Our faculty are in their office during office hours quite regularly. Alumni are, I've never been with a group of alums that are stronger than the Duke alumni in terms of their desire to engage with students, either personally or electronically. And so we want students to have the skill and the comfort to be reaching out to people and learning how to develop that kind of network. And then we've talked about the developmental competencies of self-awareness, the ability to research, the ability to adapt. And I can't tell you how important adaptation is, not just when something doesn't work, but your students, as we look at the marketplace that's coming, it is changing so fast, and new fields are coming and old fields are disappearing so quickly that realistically, one of the most important skills students can develop in college is the ability to change intentionally and to move assertively. No group of students has the ability to be ahead of the curve more than your sons and daughters. They have the knowledge, the ability to learn, the ability to change, and we want to cultivate that in them so that they are powerful in the market across their lifetime. The ability to tell that story, the world is not a meritocracy, as you all know. Simply getting the best grades is not going to get you the best job. Your ability to talk about what it is that makes you a strong student will go a lot further. And so that communication is really critical. And then, frankly, it's the ability to have a plan and to know how to implement that plan. So, our best advice: use the Duke experience as a laboratory to engage in your intentional professional development from the beginning and across the time. If you learn how to manage a complex environment like Duke, there is no environment you're going to go into that you can't manage. We talk about the notion of being tactical and strategic. What do you need to do to get to the end of the semester? But what is your ultimate goal with your education? And what do you imagine your career? How do you want it to be? Even knowing that it may change along the way, having a tactical and strategic orientation concurrently is really critical. Effective career development focuses on today, tomorrow, and the long-term future. And if we can impress you and your sons and daughters with the critical nature of that, I can't think of a more important learning than they can have. So we have come to the end of the presentation. We're going to move to question and answer. And my goal is that Christina is with me because she has all of the answers. And I'm hoping that she and I will share this point. And so we will turn it back to Grace to field the questions and let us know where we go from here.
Wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill. That was great. So again, my name is Grace, and I'm here as the representative from Parent and Family Programs. This is the time for your questions. If you have questions and haven't submitted them yet, if you look for what looks like the speech bubble icon within your program, you should be able to chat in questions there, send them to me, and then I'm going to be asking them out loud to our presenters so that they can answer your questions. I'd like to start with one that's already come in, and it says, does the Duke Career Center have trainings for each of these competencies? Can a student sign up for a training, or how would you encourage students to pursue building these competencies that you've mentioned?
Great question. So we don't have a specific training on Reflect or a specific training on Connect, for example. However, our competencies are what we like to say integrated in a lot of our workshops and programs, whether that's in our counseling or advising sessions, whether that's in workshop requests we get from student clubs or organizations. We bring up the competencies and use it as a foundation of here's what you need to know, here's how you can grow and learn and practice in each of these competencies, and help them think about next steps or goals that they can do to pursue that.
There are also materials online on the Career Center website that students can go to in the resource area, where there are materials on building a board of directors, for example, or there are materials on the 9 domains, which is an exercise that we use for a student to help them engage in the self-awareness process. So yes, there are materials there, and we bring them and use them often in our presentations. So the answer to the question is not always, but frequently.
Great. I think this feels like a related question, but what exposure would the average student on this campus have to the competencies that we're talking about? How are students on campus interacting with the Career Center or receiving these messages from the Career Center?
Great. So a few times we've done a few trainings with our student groups on campus or student leaders. So for example, we worked with the peer advisors who work with academic advising and helping students navigate classes and choosing their major. And we talk with them about reflect and connect and how they themselves can engage in reflection and connection, but also how can they work with their first year students to also understand those concepts. And we're actually working on another training with our first year advisory board, those leaders there to do a similar training.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we have trained virtually everyone in the Division of Student Affairs on the model. We've trained all of the academic advisors in the Trinity advising process. We are engaged now in planning training for the advising community in Pratt. And so in addition to hearing it from the Career Center, we are really working to make sure that these notions of the model and the competencies necessary in the model are things that come up not just from the Career Center where they might think, obviously, we would be presenting them, but they're hearing them in conversations in the Wellness Center. They're hearing them in conversations in the academic advising that's happening with their individual advisor. So yes, they get it in a number of ways in addition to training you today so that they're going to get it over the next break when you're going to share it with them as well.
Great. And one follow-up question on that. Let's say a parent is listening right now and shares this information with their student, and their student is feeling like they haven't yet received some of these messages. Where would you encourage a parent to send their student? Where can a student go, or how can they start these conversations so they're thinking about these competencies and post-graduation planning?
Tell them to email Christina directly. You have her email there, and they can come into the office in drop-in hours. We're available. We have drop-in hours every afternoon. They can make an appointment with an individual counselor. Obviously, they can get it through their academic advisor. But I would suggest that if they want to engage, the best way is to come into the Career Center in Smith Warehouse and engage in a conversation either with one of the counselors or one of our peer advisors so they can help them get started.
And I feel confident adding on, because we just received a question from a parent that says, well, what if my student has no idea where to start? And that they can, so I'm assuming it's very safe that they can come in having no idea what they want to major in, where they want to start, and they can just start a conversation from there.
Yes. I have students who come in my office all the time. I was told to come to the Career Center, but I'm not really sure what this is or what to expect from this experience. So we definitely talk a little bit about what the Career Center does and really dive into their interests, their goals, what have they really found compelling during their time at Duke so far, and maybe how has that changed since they first got here. Even though it might only be a few months, but a lot changes very quickly here. So definitely coming in and having an appointment is a really great place to start, and we can see what they would need after that.
I think one of the great mythologies about career centers among students is that you really need to know what you want before you go into the Career Center. And realistically, we know that most students, they think they have an idea, but frankly, the idea is developing and they're going to be challenged every day here with information and experiences that they've never had. And so even if they have a plan, it's unlikely that that plan is going to stay constant. And for those parents who are worried about their student deciding that they are going to change their mind, I've also seen students who take a semester or two and decide they're going to do something else and then go back to their original plan because they rediscover it. So, that motion is very, very constant. And realistically, as a career counselor, for me, the greatest fun is a student who comes in the door and says, look, I'm trying to figure out who the hell I am and why I'm here and how I can thrive. And for me, that's like manna from heaven, because that's the conversation that's the most fun.
Great. One parent asked if they can or should come to that Career Center visit with their student.
My answer would be no. Okay, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's really critical that students learn to manage the environment on their own. So if you want to come and bring the student to introduce them to somebody that you've met in the Career Center, great. You want to give them a name and an address, great. If you and they decide after a meeting that there's a conversation you want to have together, that happens fairly regularly. But realistically, our engagement is with the student. And so they can share everything that goes on in the conversation with you, but we would prefer the conversation be with the student.
Great. There are a lot of questions about internships generally and how can students find an internship or just look for general opportunities with employers out there to gain experiences.
Great. So we have a few resources that are coming to mind. The biggest one would be Career Connections. That is our one-stop shop job board for any employers that are interested in hiring Duke students. They will have their jobs posted and listed in this system.
And internships.
And internships, yes. The other thing that the system has is all the registration for our career events that happen on campus. So this could be information sessions with employers. It could be a major mixer event we have. It could be our Fannie Mitchell expert in residence who come, career fair, any of our events that involve employers or internships, we will have them posted on that Career Connections website. And go ahead.
I think in addition to that, many of the centers, so if a student is really interested in entrepreneurship, the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship engages with Duke alumni all the time who are coming back that may be venture capitalists or maybe entrepreneurs themselves, and there's a lot of exchanges and ideas. The Alumni Association manages a database of alums who have agreed to give advice about their field. We teach students how to use more national kinds of tools like LinkedIn. But frankly, about 94.6% of students who get jobs at graduation tell us that the employer that they got their job with had a relationship with the Career Center. And so it's really not, we're not the only game in town, but we're certainly a good starting place. And we will advise students about other markets to get involved with. And that's as true for a first semester freshman as it is perhaps a senior who's thinking about taking a gap year or two before they go to graduate school. And so gaining experience, whether it's an internship on campus or in Durham or something international, the materials are there, as Christina said, and the resources are there as well.
Another note on that is also taking advantage of summer opportunities that happen at Duke that are not internships necessarily, but provide great experiences. So for example, a Duke Engage experience, or going to a Bass Connections research project over the summer. Those have equally as great experiences, and students are going to come back with those transferable skills that are going to be marketable for a lot of different industries. So we also like to talk about other experiences besides the formal internship with the students as well.
There are three that I would mention to follow up on Christina's great idea. Data Plus, Story Plus, and Coding Plus are all summer experiences that are available to students at Duke, mentored by Duke faculty members, where students work in teams on data, coding, or communications and storytelling, which are all very important skills, as we've already mentioned. So there's a wide array of those kinds of programs, and students often do research with faculty members during the summer, if that's an area of interest for them. So lots of opportunities.
I have what I think are two quick follow-up questions to that. I'm going to ask them together. So one is, can parents access the Career Connections website? And the second is, for students who receive internship offers that are far away and don't come with housing, does the Career Center or Duke offer any support in finding housing to make an internship work?
Yeah. The first question is no, parents can't come into Career Connections. Their students can share what they will with the parents, but there are no parent accounts in Career Connections. The second answer is that very often we have ideas about housing in different places, but also the alumni network is extraordinarily strong worldwide, and students should be connecting with the alumni clubs in and around the environments where they are going to be living, and very often there's help there for housing.
Another resource to keep in mind too is that we have an internship funding program. So if your student is having a low paying or unpaid internship, they can apply for up to $3,000 of scholarship money to do their internship. So that usually covers living expenses and some of those pieces. So that application period is actually open now. So if your student is interested in that, they can apply.
Great, thank you. There are a few questions asking for advice about a junior or senior getting started and getting connected to your office for the first time. How would you advise a junior or senior connecting to you all?
It's really the same advice we gave for the freshmen, which is, irrespective of where a student is in their journey, today or tomorrow is the best day to get started on making progress. And so coming into the Career Center, looking around, setting up an appointment or going through drop-ins is probably the easiest way, so that they can talk to somebody with immediacy and say, look, this is where I am. I'm very confused, or I'm very clear about what I want to do, but I have no idea how to get there from here. And we would start a conversation with a junior or senior. There are many students who, are so engaged academically that the first time they come to the Career Center is later in their career. We're trying to prevent that, but frankly, we're very familiar with that process and work with students, and can work very quickly with students to get them up to speed.
I'd say when a junior and senior come in too, I think it goes back to that tactical and strategic. How can we get you what you need now, but also how can we help you think about the long term, and maybe this will help get your foot in the door for your first job, and then we can think about pivoting or making sure that you're still being intentional about your development. But we want to make sure that they're getting both of those pieces so we can tackle the broad range of feelings I'm sure they're having at that moment.
Great. So the next stage in this question builds perfectly from where we are. How do students engage with the Career Center after graduation? Is there a specific individual they should be contacting as alumni, and what resources are still available to them?
Yeah, we serve students the first year after graduation, and during that time they would continue to work with the office and are eligible for virtually all of the services. The on-campus recruiting program is probably the one place where the young alums don't participate. Everything else is available. Realistically, there is not a single person, because many of the students want to continue the relationship with the counselor they were working with while they were in school. But if they have changed fields, many of our counselors have areas of specialization in addition to their general practice. And so they might be referred to one of the counselors who specializes in business or science and technology or allied health fields or public service, whatever it is. And so they can pursue it either way.
Great. One parent asked, you mentioned employers wanting more and earlier access to students. What can students do to increase their access to employers?
engage with the Career Center and the programming that we're doing. When they go into Career Connections, it's a smart system, and so if they give us information about what areas they're interested in and what they're curious about, the artificial intelligence will send them programming that relates to the kinds of interests that they have. And they can make that as broad as they want or as specific as they want. I recommend broad because it will introduce them to things that they haven't thought about yet. But some of them are already pretty focused, and so the system will accommodate that. But I think it's really a matter of getting intentional, getting involved, and building a relationship with the center and with the team that's there.
We also have a few programs called First Contact, for example, which is a 30-minute virtual session with an employer who is interested in reaching out to first-year students. And we have a broad range of internship programs that, like Intern Mix, for example, is when a student who interned last summer comes back and talks to students who are interested in interning, and they are almost like ambassadors or representatives of that company that they interned at. So the student can learn like a peer-to-peer kind of learning model with that. But a lot of these events will just give students exposure to what's out there, what are some new industries that they might not have heard of, and how to find out more about those.
Wonderful. Do you all record any of your events? If someone misses out on some event, one parent asked, like these webinars are recorded, and yes, that is a reminder that we will record this webinar and it will be available later. Do you all record any events? I think they mentioned in particular, was it an aquarium that came down or a marine lab? Mm-hmm. For example, if that student wanted to hear what happened in that event.
No, because those are the way that session was running was conversations between a student and that particular employer, and so we obviously wouldn't. We do try to do more and more recording of events, but frankly, as you know, persisting through an hour-long webinar is a hard enough challenge when you're really interested. Our students don't have that kind of attention span. And so they rarely will watch a 40-minute presentation online. So we try to do things through podcasts and translate what we see through different media on YouTube or podcasts or other kinds of events. So yes, we record some, but not as much as you might think.
Great. We are getting very close to the end of our questions, so if you have a last question, this is your time to submit it. If you all could reiterate, if students don't have something for this summer, they don't yet have an internship or an opportunity, what would you advise right now with a few months to go until the summer?
Well, we have a career fair that is a summer job and opportunity fair coming up on the 24th. Okay. And that fair is happening. So realistically, I know many parents think their son or daughter, if they don't have a job yet or an internship yet, as Christina mentioned, the funding program the applications for that is now. It's because many students don't know what they're doing for the summer yet. And so many industries, the companies don't know how many people they're going to hire yet. So realistically, this is not a bad time for a student to get started. I would say I wouldn't wait till April, but I would get started now, and a career fair would be a great place to begin, along with stopping into the office and sitting down with one of the counselors to explore the specifics of what you want to do or to get your materials in order.
We're also having a first year career fair preview from 9:30 to 10 right before the career fair. So for first years who have never seen it before or don't really know what to expect, they can get an understanding of that. There's also some other boutique career fairs like Tech Connect or Startup Connect that are happening this semester that might be of interest to your students.
Wonderful. So I'd like to kind of end, I think, on what would your last advice be for parents who are wanting their student to get more involved earlier in their experience with the Career Center and with postgraduate planning?
I think the thing that I would want to emphasize is that it's really critical that the student be the one who's managing this process. We know it's a difficult thing for students to find the time because students are always engaged in too much. But realistically, it's the encouragement from parents to say, look, we want you to be intentional. We want you to move at your pace. We want you to get engaged with the university in the ways you need to in order to learn to manage this process and to make it your own. Parents are not going to manage their careers. They're not going to manage the changes that they go through. And it's really critically important to us that each Duke student becomes the manager of their own professional development. And so it's the encouragement. If something we've said today made sense, share with your son or daughter that, wow, they seem to know what they're doing. Go and meet with them. Go and talk with them. See what you think. And get them into the office. That's really the most important thing. Christina?
So I would say helping them reflect on all that's happening to them at the moment. So even that phone call you might get from your son or daughter of, this is what's happening for me this semester. Oh, this class is really hard. Those conversations, believe it or not, help them so much in figuring out what feels right to them, what feels like a strong interest, or what does not. So having those would be really helpful. And then also helping them figuring out how to find out more. If you're seeing that they have these interests or some new things are coming up, ask them how intentional they're being about finding out more information. What research are they doing? Who are they talking to on campus? Instead of it just being a constant wonder, I wonder what that would be like. Have them be more actionable on those items because they don't have a lot of time here.
Wonderful. Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap up. There are a few parents out there who asked very, very specific questions, and I am going to get back to you as soon as we wrap this up. If you leave this conversation and realize you still have questions, I know you could email our presenters. Their contact information is up there. You can also email familyprograms@duke.edu, and we'll be sure to follow up. We want to make sure that you all get the answers that you want. We are recording this. We have recorded this. It will go up in about 48 hours. Just give us some time to transcribe it and make sure that we can put it on the web. Thank you all again for joining us for this hour. And I want to give a huge thank you to Bill and Christina for giving us your time today and for all that you're doing to support all Duke students and the students of the parents that are online now. So thank you.